So I'm joined by Max Shanley, who's on the Grassroots left slate, who's running in the CEC elections. Max, how are you doing?
I'm dandy, mate. How are you?
I'm fantastic, really good. I know we've got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot to talk about today. So just to start off, you're standing on the Grassroots left slate. Why should people vote for you?
We're the only ones that are fully committed to democratising the party, giving members access to data, giving them access to funds. We believe that members should have, local branches should have at least 50% of all member fees, so that they can actually be meaningfully autonomous. We're the only slate that is committed to fully democratising the party via a democracy commission. We're the only slate that's committed to having a rank and file approach to trade unions. We don't want to go off and do deals with trade union bureaucrats or general secretaries. We want to build class power from below, organising rank and file workers as workers inside of their unions, both to organise against the bosses and to organise against the bureaucracy. Our whole intent in this election, were we to take power inside your party, is to turn the entire party into a gigantic lever for popular political mobilisation, backing all sections of the exploited and oppressed, and providing a socialist perspective for real change.
Now, given all of the drama over the past year, what do you think needs to happen to bring about unity?
Unity can't be forced upon people. It has to be built through constructive dialogue, and that includes having arguments as well. We're not all going to agree on everything. However, if we can develop a political program that we all accept, that is the basis for unity. Unity in objectives, unity in our political diversity, rather than unity for unity's sake. You can't fake unity. You can't force it from above. It has to be built from below.
Yeah, I think it's a fair answer because unity can sort of be like a sort of kumbaya, sing a song together. But of course, there are political disagreements.
Yeah, no, look, we're not, socialism is not going to come about by someone organising a national bonfire and everyone around the
Mm.
country holds hand and some geezer comes out, usually some white geezer with dreadlocks with a fucking acoustic guitar and starts singing Kumbaya. And then the next thing we know, socialism occurs. It'll
Mm.
be forged in the heat of battle and in the fire of struggle. It's as simple as that, you know. And that's why we need to have a multi-pronged approach to actually achieving our socialist objectives, both by engaging with people where they are in their communities, organising on the streets, but also standing in elections. But the key thing is that we make sure that we're not defined by elections, because if we define ourselves purely by our electoral success, we're bound to doom ourselves, essentially. It's going to take a very long time for your party to be in a position whereby it could potentially form a government. And we have to be prepared for that. State power is not a hop, skip, and a jump. Um, I believe it took the Labour Party 24 years to form a minority administration. That's with a strong workers' movement behind it. That failed spectacularly because it didn't have a popular majority behind it. It then took them another 21 years to form a majority administration. So that's 45 years. Now, look, the climate crisis shows that we do not have 45 years, right? We just don't. We won't have a world to live in if we wait that long. But that means that we have to have a serious strategy and be seriously minded about what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to achieve it and how we're going to bring the population along with us in doing so. Socialism as a minoritarian project is one that is always doomed to fail. It needs to be a project for the emancipation of the majority.
What current problems do you see in your party, and what do you think is currently holding it back?
Well, I'll tell you the number one problem is that we've existed now for, I don't know, 8 months, something like that. We don't have a single policy, not one. Uh, the party has been split into two camps, largely on by the media into like personality camps. Oh, you're either Team Zara or you're Team Jeremy. So a completely wrong reading of it, right? It's about two competing political visions for this party. One, which is probably best represented by Jeremy, is that older, social democratically minded wing. And then on the other hand, the side in which the media have ascribed to Zara is the more explicitly democratic socialist wing that wants to go beyond capitalism, right? But there's things that both wings can learn from one another, just as, uh, there's things that reformists can learn from revolutionaries and revolutionaries can learn from reformists. We're all part of one big socialist family tree. We might be in separate branches right now, but, if you look at a tree, sometimes branches grow and then they end up crossing over with one another and they become stronger in the process.
Just the interest of brevity, you kind of have what you're saying is the many, which is the social democratic fixing capitalism side. Grassroots left is more the explicitly democratic socialist side. Of course, there's many different viewpoints within those two, but would it be fair to say that's broadly what the two sort of factions represent?
I wouldn't describe them as factions
Okay.
per se. I would describe them as trends within the
Yeah.
party, right? Because they're not homogenous blocks. But then you could also argue that every faction isn't a homogenous block. If you take the constructive faction that I'm a part of, Democratic Socialists of your party, we are not a homogenous bunch of people. We're united in our diversity, but we're also united around a program that we've all democratically agreed upon. Um, and I think it's shown that, by doing so and having a clear program and setting objectives uh, inside of your party, we've been able to achieve several things that we set out to achieve, like collective leadership. I was the first person way back in July to call for the party to have collective leadership. Everybody said that was mad. It was either going to be single leader or co-leader, and I said no. Democracy is when the govern themselves. That means that members have to be the leader of the party, not MPs, not faceless bureaucrats. And the Democratic Socialists ultimately managed to get that on the agenda at conference, and the membership voted for it. And so, uh, you know, I think that programmatic unity works. And I think that your party could have programmatic unity. And I think that through that programmatic unity, we could actually achieve socialism in our lifetime.
So if we look to last year, I mean, your party reached 15% in the polls, but today some polling is showing less than 1%. So, in your view, what needs to be done to bring back support? And what can you do to make sure that happens? Because I mean, 15% when you just started, were neck and neck with Labour in one poll. Now the support is gone. What can you do, whether it's your individual candidacy or grassroots stuff, to really bring that support back?
Right. So basically, the party doesn't exist yet as like a tangible thing. It only exists in theory. Most people don't see our party out there. They only read about it in the newspapers. It exists as a kind of abstract entity. So we need to actually get to work organising our party and building the necessary infrastructure that we need to be an actually existing organisation. That means organising branches straight away. That means regularising or legalising the so-called proto branches, which, let's face it, they're not proto branches; they're branches, right? They're the only democratically formed, legitimate forums through which party members currently organise collectively. We need to adopt some kind of interim program because the party does not have a single policy at present. And that program needs to be fairly comprehensive and cover a wide range of issues beyond simply the kind of bread and butter issues that a lot of people seem to think that we should just focus on. There's questions regarding the organisation of the state and the economy that we actually need to address, as well as addressing those bread and butter issues around the cost of living and so on. But we need to set our sights far higher than we did during our time in the Labour Party. We are not bound by the constraints of bourgeois respectability anymore, nor do we have the Labour right there to act as a kind of moderating force. We can be who we say we are, which is socialists, and we can say that proudly without any reservation whatsoever and fight for what we believe in without fear nor favour.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because speaking to other people in and out of the party, they'll say, we really need to focus on bread and butter issues. People care about wages, inequality, poverty, public ownership, for example. Broadly, social democratic left econ policy. That is popular. And yeah, and speaking to, watching interviews from people, and the many would say that's kind of the core thing we should speak about. You're saying they're obviously important, but you want to talk about more broader, not even broader, but let's say future thinking kind of politics, not just the bread and butter issues. I guess one would say, though, how does that work in terms of like door knocking and reaching to people, given that people don't even know what socialism is? I mean, people think socialism when government does stuff. Is that going to be a harder sell to be like, obviously we care about your material needs right now, but have you thought about the democratic economy? Would you appreciate that's a lot harder to sell? What's your answer to that one?
I don't think it's necessarily something that's harder to sell, right? It all comes down to what your communication strategy is. But I don't think that your politics should be guided by communication strategy. I think it should be the other way around. I think you should be putting politics first. The fact that people live in abject poverty and everything isn't an accident. It's by design of the very system that we all live under the capitalist system, right? And the state plays a large role in keeping that system from running. Its number one priority, above all else, is to facilitate capital accumulation, to make rich people richer, basically. All the stuff that it does vis-a-vis like the welfare state and everything like that, it does begrudgingly. It doesn't want to do these things. It does it because of popular pressure to a certain extent, a level of popular pressure that has been diminishing over time due to the lack of organisation that only a socialist party can actually provide, but also because, various aspects of the welfare state are actually required to keep capitalism from running. As Quintin Hogg, who was a Tory MP in the 1940s, said at the time of the introduction of the NHS, without reform, they'll give us revolution. So, we can fight for reform, but reform only lasts for so long, right? People often forget that the whole Benite heresy of the late 70s and the 80s, because that's what Benism was considered at the time. It was considered a political heresy because it said, no, look, the gains of the post-war consensus are great, but they can't be sustained under the existing economic model. We have to go beyond. We have to go beyond capitalism entirely, and that means going beyond the capitalist state form as well. Social democratic reform came into being for a variety of reasons. One of them was the strength of the workers' movement in the West primarily, but also like the existence of the Soviet Union, basically. Like they saw that as a massive threat. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. So it's not a competing pole of attraction to the working class in that sense, whatever the faults of the Soviet Union, ignoring that right now. So, I think in the day in which we live, when we speak of reform, what the ruling class think is revolution. And that being the case, they would oppose even a fairly mild agenda like the one that we put forward in 2017 and 2019. They would oppose that with every fibre of their being. Every institution, every form of organisation that they have to hand would be organised against us. And to kind of paraphrase Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the only way in which you can fight organised money is by having an organised mob. And the job of the Socialist Party is to organise that mob, by which I mean the many.
There are many different views within your party, of course. Some have criticised the Green Party for being pro-NATO, for example. I want to get your view. To be honest, you are representing the grassroots left, and I want to get your understanding of where you're at, because the other day there was a statement from the grassroots lefts kind of going after the Greens. There was a bit of confusion because then Zara Sultana, who's also on the Grassroots left, then said, no, we should back the Greens and Hannah Spencer. So to speak on behalf of me, of either yourself or Grassroots left, is there a space to really back the Greens in certain by-elections like Gorton and Denton, whilst also recognising your differences? Or do you feel like that there is a fundamental difference between the Greens and your party and you would find it difficult to work with them?
Right. So there's 2 points there. So on the statement that went out, I felt that I think it could have been worded better, but I think there was a kind of willful misreading on behalf of many people. What the statement actually said was that we shouldn't give unconditional support to the Greens because primarily they are a pro-capitalist and pro-NATO party. Now, look, I think we should give conditional support to the Greens in certain situations like the by-election that's taking place in Manchester over the coming weeks. But it should be conditional. We shouldn't be supporting the Greens without illusions. They're not a socialist party. They're basically their whole shtick right now is to try and replace the Labour Party as the kind of left wing of British capitalism, basically. So we should be aware of that. I do think that if we continue along the path that some people stand in these elections believe in, that we take that more conservative minded social democratic trend, and I use conservative with a small c here. I don't want to be mistaken here. I'm not calling anybody a Tory whatsoever. I'm just talking about, small c, conservatively minded sort of social democrats. If we take that path, there will be barely a fag's papers difference between what we offer and what the Greens offer. And I'm not being funny. People would just vote for the Greens. We have to be bolder. And we have to be bolder not just for the sake of trying to win votes or anything like that, but because that's what this era demands of us. But also because it's what we believe in. The time for timidity is over.
So let's say, I know obviously policy is collectively decided, but like for you personally, like would you like to see a manifesto in which we unilaterally pull out NATO and we have an economic policy which is quite literally talking about mass worker co-ops and the democratic ownership of the economy, or we speak in a more of a transitional way, like a working towards kind of a socialism? What's your view on that?
Socialism can refer to many things. Some people believe socialism to be when the government does stuff. I disagree with that. Others believe that socialism is just when the working class holds state power, right? You are not going to be able to get rid of capitalist social relations overnight. The capitalist economy will continue even after you strip the capitalists of their political power, which is something that you could do overnight. By winning a landslide majority and basically legislating their power out of existence. But the sort of capitalist economy will continue to exist. The question is how you go about transitioning from one economic model to the next. And there will be a period of time, a generation or two, whereby essentially you would have a kind of birdcage economy. The capitalist bird would be free to fly around to a certain extent, but it would be contained inside of a cage, and that cage would be a bird cage of popular democracy, basically. But the transition from one economic model to the next would take time. It took, well over 100 years to move from feudalism to capitalism, especially when you live in a globalized economy. We wouldn't survive if we tried to simply transition immediately over to an entirely different economic model overnight. If we tried to nationalize the whole economy, for example, it just wouldn't work. We would face international sanctions. We would struggle to get access to food, the very basic necessities of life. So you kind of have to box clever on these things. But it is possible to end the political power of capital as a class very, very quickly. And once you do that, they're your pawn men, not the other way around. And, we do have to remember that 99% of the British economy is just small businesses. A very small amount of the economy is actually, large industry. However, it should be remembered that amongst that 1%, about 25 companies control something like 25% of Britain's economic output. So we should definitely consider bringing them into public ownership and under democratic control. I think it is a kind of cowardly position to be like, oh, we'll only take industries into public ownership if they're not profitable. No, we should take the for-profit enterprises into ownership as well. We should set up state-owned, organised, state-owned enterprises as well to compete with capital to a certain extent, but also to go beyond the constraints that they give themselves through the pursuit of private profit. I thought that one of the best policy proposals that was developed during the Corbyn era was that we should have a wholly state-owned pharmaceutical company to produce generics and to do research. I think the pandemic proved the sort of timeliness of that demand, but it also would kind of serve two purposes, right? It would cut the amount of expenditure that the NHS has to put out paying for medications. Before I came on here, I looked up how much the NHS spends on my bipolar medication every year, and it's thousands and thousands of pounds. And then when you actually look into it, it costs pennies to actually make. So we could reduce, the NHS's expenditure on pharmaceutical products very, very quickly. We could do massive amounts of research and actually, cure shit. I don't know if you've seen the stuff that's been going around this week about Dr. Barbicide in Spain, who's developed a cure for pancreatic cancer, which is, one of the most deadly fucking cancers in the world. My nan died of it. She got it. Within 6 months, she was gone. It's one of the worst forms of cancer. 30 million he needs to develop that cure. We could do that, we could benefit the world and benefit ourselves at the same time. We could be a shining beacon for humanity.
Max, thank you so much for coming on Turn Left, and good luck on the campaign.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to you again.